Right, back live tonight. Let's take a look at what's making news now beyond our borders. The African Union has suspended Niger from all its activities following a military coup last month. In a statement, the AU said it had taken note of regional bloc Ecowas' decision to activate a standby force for a possible military intervention. The Union has also asked the AU Commission to assess the economic, social and security implications of deploying such a force. For more on this, we're now joined by Africa analyst Joseph Ochieno. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. Does this mean that now the junta does not have legitimacy in this particular matter and the actions that they've taken?
It's interesting. It's rather vague, isn't it? But military coups have taken place on the continent before, and it appears that unless and until maybe tact is changed by the African Union and the different regional blocs on the continent, particularly when ordinary African citizens in rather unstable African nation states complain about challenges, whether it's about human rights situations or the economic situation in those countries, or perhaps law and order or injustices around and about communities, that continental bodies and regional bodies respond slightly much more openly. What has happened here is a situation in which the Nigerian junta have actually taken an open swipe and a challenge to the African Union and indeed to Ecowas. It would appear that although now the three sides, including the African Union, is taking a position on this matter, you could really say that nobody seems to have a particular upper hand. The junta is substantially popular. The junta has been backed by neighbors in the region who are willing to work with them. I think across the continent, this is the first time for me in a very long time, somebody who covers the continent and shares conversations around political issues on the continent. It's the first time in a very long time that you can feel that Africans are beginning to say once again, in a very unfortunate way, that once democratic institutions fail and once leaders actually fail to meet the expectations of the ordinary citizens, that a military option, in terms of a coup, is a legitimate way. But of course, in this case, it's a coup that has taken place, and the Ecowas and African Union quite rightly are saying coup is not acceptable.
Yeah.
How they're responding, though, I think, is rather unfortunate, because they're beginning with the bigger stick by saying that we shall invade if you don't respond rather than talking. But the tone has changed in the last few weeks, meaning the junta, just like Ecowas themselves, have also changed position, meaning there's a possibility now that the junta might continue for the next 3 or so years, and maybe even this invasion, as talked about, consideration is being given, as I understand very recently, that nation states around the region, including Algeria, if true, are saying that they're not willing to allow their airspaces to be used for attacking Niger. Yeah. So I think it's a very mixed situation, quite unusual for the continent this season.
What could be the implications of that? I mean, for one, the Sahel region, for an Islamist group, for the junta to defy a body like the African Union and ECOWAS together working on the bloc. There are some who are already saying those organizations are just organizations without any bite, really.
Unfortunately, those are seemingly my suggestion at this time. With the exception of the rather robust move in which ECOWAS acted on the Gambia, they haven't acted on Burkina Faso, they haven't acted on Mali, they haven't acted on Chad, you could argue. The Chadian authorities came from this kind of background, and so nor did they in Guinea. And what exactly are they going to do which is new on this occasion? That is one. But number two, as I was trying to hint much earlier, for a situation in which the military believe and feel that it's okay for them to take over power, and in a situation in which the majority seemingly of the civilian population seem to back them, they will normally give reasons, and in many cases they'll give reasons. The Idi Amins of this world gave them rather bizarre reasons for them seeking to overthrow the legitimate and democratic governments. But part of the argument that has been made substantially by this junta is that where is the African Union when corruption is being talked? Where is the African Union where ordinary citizens are disappearing? Where is the African Union when elections take place and some dubious guys take over power, meaning they rig elections and stuff ballot papers, and where the African Union, where the ordinary citizens are living rather poorly, when the elite, the few elite at the top, are siphoning resources to benefit a privileged few in particular nation states. But am I saying that, well, the answer is a military coup? Of course not. I have campaigned for multipartyism and pluralism, including in South Africa, nearly all my life. I am simply saying that maybe this is the time, not only for those two bodies that we're focusing on, but maybe for the African citizens themselves to begin to look inward, including African politicians, begin looking inward. Why is it that the average African citizen, including possibly in average South Africa, are getting concerned that whether it's about cost of living or whether it's about, as I said, opportunities for employment, or indeed, for that matter, a particular case where, in many cases, opposition leaders are behind bars and there is nobody, whether the regional bodies or indeed Pan-Africanist bodies, organizations, are not responding.
In the words of the Ecowas mediator, nobody wants to go to war, and signaling that the past weekend there's been some fruitful engagements. Yeah. But the Ecowas bloc has already imposed a broad number of sanctions on Niger. What else would help in this particular instance that could lead to some kind of a peaceful and diplomatic resolution?
You're absolutely right, and that's why I said they're actually providing mixed messages. To put in sanctions, and you're saying you're not... I mean, sanctions basically means it's possibly their second last resort on this very particular occasion. The junta have said that, well, unless sanction is lifted, they're not going to have meaningful conversations. Of course, they've actually talked about a possibility of releasing the deposed president. That is a symbol, a sign of possibility of progress in there. I think both sides will have to give in. For the moment, I think the nearest that the rest of the regional organizations can do is possibly not to invade. And the best that the junta can do is to release the former president and guarantee security. And the best that then they can guarantee the Nigerian authority, communities and nations, citizens, and the rest of Africa, including people like myself, who are believers in the pluralist polity, is to say and give a particular program or timetable that they're going to return the country back to a civilian rule. But of course, we know from history that, with the exception of maybe the Sankaras of these days, these guys come and they talk sweet, and by the 12th month, they're banning political parties and they're targeting opponents, and they're doing so many of the other things that some of the usual suspects, like the Musevenis of this world, did and talked about 40 years ago, and today they're entrenched and they're now becoming monarchies in the Republican African countries. It's extremely unfortunate, and I said, really time is now for us to begin to have a conversation in the continent amongst academia, political leaders, commentators like myself, journalists like yourself, to begin to say, where are we as a continent and why is this happening? Of course, you hinted on the question of Sahel. Sahel is very specific, and especially sub-region by nature and definition in terms of topography. And it's also true that the Islamists are there. Really, there is no evidence that the Islamists are preempting this. It's, in my opinion, very much about, obviously, interest from the West, interest from Russia, and of course, as I say, failure by the political elite on the continent to deliver for the average African population. This is something that we need to begin to have a conversation in. I cannot wait for African Union to begin to have major conferences in Addis Ababa, having conversations about root causes of conflicts, root causes of war, and how to stop war, but also how to stop people who use power of the state, in this case, elected leaders, they may be genuinely elected, who actually go into what you and in South Africa and perhaps in Uganda call state capture. How do we deal with those? Unless and until we're able to deal with some of those other things, some of these coups may continue to begin to become a formality on the continent, unfortunately.
With a voice like that of the African Union, they have come out to say they strongly reject any external interference in the situation by any actor or country outside of Africa. It's a strong statement, but maybe mild, because what is the follow-up thereafter?
It's a contradiction, and that's why I'm trying to say that really the lead responsibility lies with the African Union. The African Union, from the change of names until today, I don't know whether, with the exception of once upon a time, big names and big voices and big ideas from the likes of Thabo Mbeki, I don't really know what the issues are today rather than grandstanding. For the Ecowas body, as I said, as a regional bloc, the best they did was that intervention in the Gambia. But as I said, I'll say this again. Where are they when citizens are being tortured, whether in DR Congo, whether in Uganda, or in Guinea, or in this case, Niger, before the coup? We need to begin to respond to underlying issues and stop responding, basically dealing with symptoms. In as long as we continue doing that, unfortunately, is the ordinary citizen that suffers, called the grass. Sanctions will normally, in this case, impact much more on the already ordinary Nigerians. I know that's the language which would be a contradiction to when we're calling for sanctions against apartheid Boers in South Africa those days, when Margaret Thatcher and the Anglo-American, lest we forget, were saying that sanctions would impact on the ordinary South Africans. But the ordinary South Africans were already suffering anyway. So in this case, I'm trying to say that, well, at the moment, that may not apply. For today, I think the issue is a peaceful settlement, and one in which the military get involved, the civilian authorities, or rather the political parties get involved, African Union gets involved, regional bodies get involved, and then also we have a new open table conversation about the manner in which African countries are being governed today. Do we have to wait for military coups in order to respond, or is it the case that when citizens in Kenya express concern of brutality, or if you like, extremes of, if you like, organized political authorities, how do we respond? It is the case, in my opinion, that African leaders and African governments are showing indifference when African citizens are suffering in the respective countries. And when, in this case, the military turn up, then we're having this conversation, which unfortunately is making us sink back as a continent and forget about the big topics like BRICS, which is rather good news taking place in South Africa.
Appreciate your time, sir. Thank you very much for coming on Africa Analyst. That's Joseph Ochieno looking at the situation in Niger and the latest move by the African Union.